When the sun comes up on America, across open fields, small towns, and city streets, a new day begins. And here, we rise with it. This is where hard work meets headlines, where truth matters, and America wakes up informed.
An interesting week.
They all are.
This is your country. This is your morning. This is Daybreak with Steve and Ivy Gruber. America, let's do it together.
Love you, Ivy.
Love you too.
And it starts right now.
Live from the campus of Hillsdale College in beautiful Hillsdale, Michigan. This is Scott Bertram sitting in for Steve and Ivy this morning on Daybreak for this May 21st of 2026. Good morning. Welcome to it. Here are three big things you need to know. Number one, former Cuban President Raul Castro is being indicted by the Justice Department. The 94-year-old is now facing criminal conspiracy charges in connection with a 1996 incident where Cuban fighter jets, they have those, shot down two planes operated by a group of Miami-based Cuban exiles, killing four. The Justice Department says the planes were flying over international waters, Castro being charged with conspiracy to kill U.S. nationals, murder, and destruction of aircraft. Number two, 3 people are dead, 19 others hospitalized after they were exposed to an unknown substance in New Mexico. Authorities say the victims died in a possible home hazmat situation in a town of Mountain Air. Responding paramedics exposed to the substance as well. 18 of them, along with one of the home's occupants, taken to the hospital for treatment. And number 3, Elon Musk could be the world's first trillionaire. This after his SpaceX company confirmed plans to sell shares of its stock to the public for the very first time. The company made more than $18 billion last year, a 33% increase from a year earlier. And I should say that's revenue, not profit. Bloomberg says Musk is already the wealthiest person on the planet. Net worth right now, 2/3 of $1 trillion, and that could be increasing. That's where we start this hour one of Daybreak with Steve and Ivy Gruber. Scott Bertram sitting in for Steve and Ivy on this Thursday morning. Thanks so much for being alongside. I'm here on the campus of Hillsdale College, where I serve as the general manager of the student radio station, the award-winning WRFH, also a lecturer in journalism, teaching students here at Hillsdale, and director of the Hillsdale College Podcast Network. You can hear me hosting shows like the Radio Free Hillsdale Hour, weekly podcast and radio show heard on many stations across the country. And I host one for National Review called Political Beats. We talk about music with people in politics. We have a fun time. You can find me on X at Scott Bertram, SCOTBERTRAM, or you can find me at scottbertram.com, where I try to corral all my media doings, also fill in work in various places right here for about a decade. Almost 10 years of fill-in work for Steve, and proud and pleased to be alongside with you on this Thursday morning. Coming up this hour, my good friend Brad Berzer, professor here at Hillsdale College, has a brand new book, The Declaration of Independence, A Radical Experiment in Liberty. We'll talk with him about that as we approach America 250. And James Marone, an energy analyst from Americans for Prosperity, he'll join us this hour too. We're talking billionaires, and we're talking about the rich this hour as we spin off that Elon Musk story. He could be the world's first trillionaire, apparently. And we got to talk about what's happening in Seattle, talk about socialist mayors, and running out of money in various entities. We're going to hear from Jeff Bezos in a little bit. Jeff Bezos, interviewed by CNBC yesterday, had some interesting things to say. And look, Jeff Bezos isn't the smartest guy in the world. What I mean by that is we don't give him extra credibility just because he has $1 billion or however many $1 billion he has, but he does have that perspective of earning $1 billion, despite what AOC might say. But we got to start over on the left coast in Seattle, one of the cities across the country like Chicago, New York, electing Democratic Socialist or flat-out socialist mayors, and now finding out what that actually means. Katie Wilson is the mayor of Seattle. And you might recall, I think we might have talked about it last time I was filling in 2 times ago. She was at a public appearance and talking about the wealthy, the rich, leaving the city and leaving the state of Washington because there's a lot of high taxes being implemented in the state of Washington. And she just said, She said claims that millionaires are going to leave our state are super overblown, and the ones that leave, like, bye. And she waved goodbye to them, just ushering them out the door. What these socialists are realizing, or at least having to grapple with, is they actually need millionaires and billionaires to make the cities work because those are the people who pay the taxes. In New York, Mayor Mamdani was crowing because he closed a budget gap, even though he's ushering millionaires and billionaires out the door. Well, he did it by getting a giant bailout from the state government in New York, which is not really high in the story about how he has balanced the budget of New York City. And now in Seattle, Katie Wilson, who just a few months ago said, I don't drink Starbucks. I'm not buying Starbucks, and you should not either. You might know Starbucks is kind of deeply connected to the city of Seattle. There's a real relationship there between the city of Seattle and Starbucks. Starbucks, though, says, "Well, you know what? We're gonna expand in Nashville, and we're gonna expand in other cities across the country, and not necessarily here in our home in Seattle." So, Seattle's Mayor Katie Wilson had to say she was wrong to slam Starbucks and push for a boycott. She said, quote, those comments were not productive in the sense they caused more harm than good, which is, yes, Katie, the definition of not productive. So very good to recognize that. Wilson also said she's aware that everything she says could be used as possible anti-business missives because they are anti-business missives. And she said she needs to have a multi-dimensional relationship with corporations like the coffee giant. Now, again, to translate, that means she wants to say the worst things she can say about billionaires and business in public, but not have it affect that private relationship and maybe have them think, well, she doesn't really mean that. She's just saying that. That's what a multidimensional relationship means. So Katie Wilson in Seattle walking back a few of those comments about Starbucks and the wealthy in the city of Seattle. Meanwhile, in Illinois, where if you're new to the program, that's where I was born and raised and lived my life until a little more than 10 years ago when I escaped and moved up here to Michigan. But I keep a close eye on Illinois politics because I have family there. I've covered it for years, for decades. And so I still keep a close eye. Plus, J.B. Pritzker, the state's governor, is almost certainly, barring something very strange, going to be running for president in 2028. So it's smart to keep an eye on what's happening in Illinois. Two times in the past week, Democratic lawmakers in Illinois have written op-eds, one to the Sun-Times in Chicago, one to the Tribune in Chicago, about how to find more money. Because shockingly, in a deep blue state run completely by Democrats up and down everywhere with supermajorities, they have run out of money. Now you can borrow more, you can try to do things, but they don't have the, even JB Pritzker has to tell people we don't have enough money to pay for your wish list. And that means it's getting real bad there. In both of these op-eds, Democrats are proposing new taxes on, for now, the richest of Illinois for unrealized capital gains. They say, well, the richest Illinoisans don't take a salary. They accumulate wealth through stocks, real estate, and investments that go untaxed until sold. So they want to start taxing those unrealized capital gains, even if you haven't sold those properties or those commodities. Question, of course, is do you get a refund then if the value goes down? I think not. And let's be honest here. Let's be frank. It might start with, oh, the billionaires. Oh, the millionaires. But eventually the left will say, well, if you own any kind of stock, you're well off, you're privileged, and you too should pay capital gains on those unrealized gains. More next. Daybreak with Scott Bertram this morning.
We're always
It's Daybreak with Steve and Ivy Gruber. Scott Bertram sitting in for Steve and Ivy this morning. Also with you on Friday. Monday, Memorial Day. Enjoy it. And then Steve and Ivy back on Tuesday of next week. Thanks for joining us this morning all across the country. We'll talk with Brad Berzer, a friend and colleague here at Hillsdale College. A new book, The Declaration of Independence, A Radical Experiment in Liberty. That'll be about 15 minutes from now. James Marone from Americans for Prosperity. He's their energy analyst. He'll join us later on this hour as well. Talking wealthy, taxes, billionaires, maybe a trillionaire in Elon Musk here in the near future. An actual billionaire, Jeff Bezos, had a conversation with CNBC yesterday. Had a few interesting things to mine, I think, from this conversation between Jeff Bezos and CNBC. And again, I don't want to, I want to give Jeff Bezos more importance than he should have, meaning he's a guy that's been extremely successful. He's a guy that's made a lot of money, a guy that had a great idea at Amazon, but it doesn't mean he knows everything about everything. But his perspective as a guy who has built something great from nothing is certainly an important one to have. And if AOC can sound off about billionaires and taxes, then certainly an actual billionaire can have ideas about that as well and thoughts about that as well. So Jeff Bezos, last time I filled in, we heard from Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who was going off on this idea that you can't, it's impossible to earn $1 billion. You can't earn that. You can only sort of cheat your way through the system to getting $1 billion. You can underpay workers, you can use tax loopholes, but you can't actually earn $1 billion. And her comments essentially were getting to the point that if you can't do it with your hands, if you can't manual labor your way to $1 billion, it's not real in some sense. It's fake. You have earned that money on the backs of the people doing the actual manual labor. That's sort of where she was going. That it's not right that you can earn $1 billion if you're not doing the labor yourself in some way, shape, or form. And then in the process, as we talked about, also capping the hopes and dreams of Americans across the country. You might be a bartender like AOC was at one point, but you also might have a fantastic idea for a fast food restaurant, for a service that thousands and then tens of thousands and then hundreds of thousands and then millions of people love and want to pay you for, and you make a lot of money and you become a millionaire or possibly a billionaire. AOC saying, nah, you can't do that. You're sort of stuck in this box that we've created for you. Jeff Bezos says, well, that's not true. Anyone can do what I did. Jeff Bezos asked yesterday on CNBC in this interview to respond to that claim from AOC that you can't actually earn $1 billion. This is cut number 2.
Read that. What do you think?
Well, it's not correct on its face. Let me give you a simple example. Let's say you start a burger joint and you have 10 employees, and you make a little bit of money.
Right.
So you have this one outlet. And by the way, these are the most delicious burgers in the world. People love your burgers, Andrew. And so then you open a second outlet.
Right.
And now you're making a little bit more money, and you have 20 employees, and you open a third outlet. By the time you've opened 1,000 outlets, you are a billionaire.
Right.
And by the way, this is a real life story. It happens all the time. It's In-N-Out Burger. It's Raising Cane's Chicken. At what point did that money all of a sudden become unethical? Or it didn't. There was one outlet, and then there were two, and then there were three. What you're doing, the way you make $1 billion or $100 million or $10 million or anything, is you create a service that people love. And if millions of people choose your service, you're going to end up with $1 billion.
There's Jeff Bezos from Amazon and elsewhere. So yeah, you can do it. You can do it. You start small, you build, you become a billionaire. Well, once you become a billionaire, what about taxes? What should that tax rate be? Now, AOC and many others saying, hey, Jeff Bezos doesn't pay taxes. He's got loopholes. He doesn't pay what he should pay. You have to pay your fair share. You've heard all of this language before. Jeff Bezos, in that interview yesterday, said right now, and you can check the numbers on this, the bottom half of all Americans only pay about 3% of the money to the Treasury, right? Only pay about 3% of the total amount to the U.S. Treasury in taxes. He said that should be zero. And that's an echo of Democratic talking points and Democratic plans that have been coming out recently from Cory Booker and others saying if you earn less than 75,000, 80,000, that number moves up and down a little bit, then your tax bill should be zero to the federal government. And that, of course, leads me to ask, do we now have two tax cutting parties in Washington? That's a topic for a different day. But Bezos was asked about this. He said, people say you don't pay any taxes at all. You're a billionaire, and Jeff Bezos, you pay no taxes. Is that true? Right. What's actually happening here? Cut 3 here. Jeff Bezos on CNBC.
And Elizabeth Warren has made this point repeatedly. I think she's made it in reference to you and others. Are able to pay a lower tax rate, even though you're paying an enormous sum in taxes, a lower tax rate than maybe I am.
These people sometimes say that I don't pay taxes. That's true. I pay billions of dollars in taxes. And it's a perfect, again, if people want me to pay more billions,
right,
then let's have that debate. But don't pretend, that's going to solve the problem. You could double the taxes I pay, and it's not going to help that teacher in Queens. I promise you.
Not going to help that teacher in Queens. And he actually expounded on this. We don't have time to play this cut right here. New York City is now spending $44,000 per student and getting worse results than they were previously in terms of outcome. And Jeff Bezos said, if you run a business like that, if I run Amazon like that, it would take you 2 months to get a package. You'd get the package. It'd be all beat up. You open it up. It's not the thing you ordered anyway. And you would have paid twice as much as you thought you were going to pay for it. That's no way to do anything. And Bezos saying, look, you can double my taxes if you want, but it's still going to be laundered through the government. The government's going to take its share, and what's going to get to the people who want it or people who need it, or the schools, or whatever gets funded, is not going to be exactly what you think it is. You can double his taxes, he says. It's not going to help that teacher in Queens. He's right about that. We've tried it. We've doubled spending on schools in Queens, and the results have been worse. That's not necessarily the answer. Scott Bertram sitting in for Steve and Ivy here on Daybreak. And Puro Clean's Veteran Initiative, PuroVet program, investing in our nation's heroes by helping them own and operate thriving local businesses. You can find more at 855 PuroVet or purovet.com, PuroVet.com. Elections happening out in California, as you're well aware. Spencer Pratt making noise in the Los Angeles mayoral race, and had a gubernatorial primary out there, jungle primary. There was some hope out there that perhaps you'd have two Republicans finishing in the top two of the primary, and then that would lock out Democrats from the general election race. It looks like that's less likely to happen right now. But if you are in California and you see a ballot, I saw a picture of this. There are so many names running for governor of California right now, and you're going to see a familiar name out there. But don't freak out. I'm going to warn you. Barack Obama is running for governor of California. It's true. Barack Obama is running for governor of California. Not that one though. Not the 44th president. A Democrat is on the ballot. Barack D. Obama, one of the options you could vote for. He changed his name to, he says, honor the former president. So you will see Barack Obama, Barack D. Obama, on the list of candidates running for California governor this year. Not the only candidate who has changed his name to highlight his values, well, or at least change his name to get more notoriety. A guy named Living for God and Country, DeMott. His first name's Living for God. His middle name's and Country. His last name's DeMott. He has no party affiliation. He's been a chaplain, worked in pest control. He says he'll fight to end ICE raids and the vehicle miles traveled tax as well. It's an odd combination of issues to campaign on. 61 total candidates are on the ballot for governor out in California because they do politics real weird out there. There's also a long history of Chicago politicians changing names or adjusting things to sound a bit more Irish in the past and win election. So in California, you could vote for Barack Obama for governor. You could even vote for Living for God and Country DeMott for governor if you so wish. Brad Berzer coming up next. Scott Bertram here on Daybreak. Welcome back. It's Daybreak with Steve and Ivy Gruber. They're off today. You have just one person. It's me, Scott Bertram. Find me on X at Scott Bertram, over at scottbertram.com, where I corral all my media doings. Very pleased to welcome to our program a good friend and colleague, Brad Berzer, an American historian, professor of history here at Hillsdale College. an author as well. His brand new book is here. It's called The Declaration of Independence, A Radical Experiment in Liberty. You can find it at Amazon.com and elsewhere. Brad, thanks so much for jumping on this morning.
Hey, good morning, Scott. Great to see you. I'm caffeinated.
You're good to go. It's a great book. We've talked at length about it previously, and recommend it to people. So we have a limited amount of time here to sort of get into what is a discussion of
Sure.
what led up to the Declaration, more so than almost anything else in this particular book. So, who were who were these people in the colonies, and where would they even get this idea about independence for themselves?
Yeah, this is great question, Scott. And what we find with the founders and the colonists in particular is that when they started coming over in the 1620s, they come over with the Mayflower Compact and other things, they had already experienced independence. That is,
Hmm.
almost every settlement in the colonies was done independently of Britain. So when we have this experience of roughly 150 years of self-governance, and the British interfere, were totally shocked by that. And that interference starts around 1761.
Now, when we think about the Declaration and we think about the Revolution, a lot of thought goes into, well, it's this revolt against taxes, and it's a Tea Party and all that stuff. It's a very important
Sure.
part of your book that says, well, yes, but it's also this revolt against courts that are outside the common law tradition. Explain that a bit to our listeners. What do you mean by that?
Sure. So there's no doubt it is a tax revolt, right? But we're very angry that we don't have representation and
Hmm.
being taxed. So no taxation without representation. But the idea of the courts themselves are that's deeply rooted in Anglo-Saxon culture and tradition and language. And the idea of a common law that we have a right to a trial by jury or the right to habeas corpus or not to have excessive bail imposed upon us or cruel and unusual punishments, that's all deeply rooted in the Anglo-Saxon past. It's actually older than Christianity. It comes from the pagan Anglo-Saxons. And so that tradition, which is at least 2,000 years old, if not longer, that's something that the Americans had believed in completely, but the British were overturning. They were actually implementing admiralty or naval law on the land, and the Americans are furious about this.
Brad Berzer is with us, a professor here at Hillsdale College. His new book, The Declaration of Independence, A Radical Experiment in Liberty. We begin before 1774. We move to 1774, and in that year, we have the first Continental Congress that convenes. What are these different factions that make up the first Continental Congress?
Yeah, again, great question, Scott. So, when we have the Continental Congress, and remember, this is not a legal institution, this is a group of men who've come together and said, we are a legal body, but there's
Hmm.
no precedent for that outside of the Anglo Saxon tradition. And within that first Continental Congress, which meets in September and October of 1774, you have the radicals like John Adams and Sam Adams, who want independence right away. Then you have the moderates like John Dickinson, great guy, who's just not ready for independence yet. And then you have the conservatives, conservatives for their day, those who believe that they can work everything out with Britain. And it turns out that the radicals only get one thing through. They get the Suffolk resolves, which are pretty
Hmm.
extreme. They're great. I mean, I love them, but they're pretty extreme for the time. But for the most part, it's the moderates allying themselves with the conservatives that really predominate in the First Continental Congress. That'll be totally reversed in the Second Continental Congress. There, the radicals take over. But in that First Continental Congress, there's still a lot of back and forth of who's actually going to be ruling things.
Now, the movement toward the Declaration is relatively slow moving toward 1774, 1775. But in 1775, with the Battle of Lexington, and you say that battle, the moment the first Lexingtonian dies, America was born. What do you mean? There's no turning back. Does it galvanize the
Right,
country? What
right.
happens?
Yeah, right. There I am throwing the gauntlet down. But It's fascinating because really most people did think of themselves by their local communities or by their colonies. And
Hmm.
yet, with that death at Lexington, several 10 deaths at Lexington at the Battle of Lexington, which is, just a lopsided massacre and unjust in so many ways. But once that first Lexingtonian is dead, there's a kind of consciousness, awareness among Americans throughout all the colonies that they're really connected with one another. Massachusetts was worried because they had always been the most radical colony. They were
Hmm.
worried that they would be blamed for starting the revolution, but in fact, everybody celebrated it. And Massachusetts really was able to kind of vindicate itself over that.
Brad Berzer with us, his new book, The Declaration of Independence, A Radical Experiment in Liberty. All right, Common Sense, Thomas Paine. Everyone knows Thomas Paine wrote Common Sense, this pamphlet that inspires the country. You say it's impossible to exaggerate the importance of common sense. What was Thomas Paine able to do in that pamphlet that people had not been able to accomplish previously?
Yeah, what Paine does, and he's a revolutionary in the best and the worst sense of that. He is truly radical. And so, in that call for independence, and it's already floating around in the American mind, people have been thinking about it for a long time. They've been debating it. But finally, we get to that winter. We've been in battle now with the British since April of 1775. We're now January 8th, January 9th of 1776. And Thomas Paine, who's a very good writer, a really good revolutionary writer, he is able to galvanize all of the Americans to recognize that they had to move towards independence. There were so many additions of common sense floating around. This would be the equivalent of Stephen King at his best in terms of selling, right? And these bestsellers. And that's exactly what Thomas Paine was. He created a bestseller, and it was beautiful because it's written to be read out loud. And we'll never understand the founding unless we recognize that this is has there's a strong oral tradition where
Hmm.
people read from the pulpit, they read in the pubs, they read on city corners, and they're always they'll get the best reader in town who will come and proclaim these things. And it was just a part of the tradition. So again, Paine was just great, not only in terms of writing, but in creating that oratorical style as well.
Interestingly enough, as you point out, John Adams, who you might think would be all for common sense and Thomas Paine, not a fan of common sense and not a fan of Thomas Paine personally. You'll have to read about
No,
that in the book. You also get to the Declaration itself and a little analysis of what Thomas Jefferson started and Congress finished. The new book from Brad Berzer is The Declaration of Independence, a radical experiment in liberty. Available now, Amazon.com and elsewhere. My friend and colleague, Brad Berzer, thanks so much for joining us this
great,
morning here on
great seeing
Daybreak.
you, Scott. Have a good
Appreciate it.
show. Thank
Thank
you.
you. Back next with James Marone from Americans for Prosperity here on Daybreak. It's Daybreak with Steve and Ivy Gruber. Scott Bertram sitting in this morning. Welcome to it. Celebrating a birthday today, Mr. T. Turned 74 years old today from the A Team on NBC and also starring in Rocky 3. Mr. T's had a long tail in the pop culture world. Of course, the signature mohawk helps, I guess. 74 years old today for Chicagoland native Mr. T. We'll call this guy Mr. M, perhaps. James Maroney is with us. He's energy analyst at Americans for Prosperity. James, thanks so much for joining us this morning.
Thanks so much for having me. Happy to be here.
Thank you. President Trump in China, an issue that is overarching a lot of these conversations. America's dependence on China for rare earth minerals. I want to back up a little bit because it does seem, James, like every time we hear oh, we're going to run out of X, we're really reliant on China for Y. There's some story somewhere about some guy in Montana that ends up finding some 72 year long supply of this rare mineral that we really need. Uh, is that common? How reliant are we still on China for these rare earth minerals that are needed in so much of our technology and so much of our electronics these days?
I wouldn't say it's hard to gauge like a percentage of reliance, but to put it in a frank manner, they control 70% to 90% of both the extraction and the processing ability in the world at this point of these rare earth minerals. And to your point, the United States has been and it still is home to a lot of these deposits across the just across the country. Whether it's I think like you said out in the Northwest, or I believe I've read some in there's belief that there's some in Georgia as well in parts.
Hmm.
So the materials are here, or at least the raw materials are here. The issue is processing and really the extraction, so mining, and
Right.
then pulling the raw materials out and making these usable components for everyday items, whether it's like your smartphone or military tech, like a Tomahawk missile or an F-35. So the kicker is the United States used to be the real leader of this up until the 1990s. And then through a combination of noble yet very misguided reforms, both environmental and just regulatory, and China's really desire to undercut a lot of U.S. industries at that time, including their just pretty much blatant disregard for any kind of regulation, whether it's safety or environment back in those, especially in the 1990s, early 2000s, put
Hmm.
our industry in an impossible situation. And that's kind of how we got to the point we are at now.
So if we've got the raw materials, what's stopping us from extraction? What's stopping us from getting them out of the ground? It's state issues, federal regulations. What's standing in our way?
The big blocker right now is permitting reform. Right
Mm.
now, permitting reform is more of a choke point than anything else. It takes 4 to 5 years roughly to get any kind of energy related project online. In mining, it takes even longer than that. So the issue is you can't even get a mine opened without direct federal involvement nowadays. For example, there's it's not so much direct or a rare earth minerals, but a mine out in I think the Northwest that was waiting for approval for close to a decade finally got pushed through after the second Trump administration fast tracked 41 and just said, okay, let's expand this mine so we can use it. And that is a common issue with almost any project, especially when it comes to mining. So if we can fix the federal permitting system, we can actually get things built. And then you can move on to building the facilities that process them. Same issue. You can't get them approved. You can't get them built. You can't get shovels in the ground. So if we can clear that choke point and make sure we can build again, we have a fighting chance to not be as reliant on foreign adversaries. It's a pretty simple fix, if you ask me.
James Maroney with us, energy analyst with Americans for Prosperity, americansforprosperity.org. We had a small taste of what it was like to not access these materials from China, of course, during the COVID shutdowns when so much international trade was limited. And a lot of people said, well, we can't let that happen again. We can't be so reliant on these other countries for our manufacturing needs here inside the country. Has that helped to expedite any of this in the past 5 years or so? This need and desire to make sure we are able to maintain and create our own energy infrastructure here.
Yeah, there's definitely been an impetus to rebuild our energy infrastructure across the board. And the House passed a couple of bipartisan bills, actually, the Speed Act and the Permits Act. They're in the Senate, and Senate negotiators, I believe just yesterday or Monday night, rather, met to discuss permitting reform. And those are the heads of the key committees involved, which is a good step forward because they were negotiated by, I believe, Senator Bennett. So
Hmm.
we're hopefully getting some movement on an issue that pretty much is agreed upon, whether you're a big solar person, if you're a fan of nuclear, if you just want natural gas, they're all stuck in the same process, and that's the federal permitting process. So we're seeing the impetus, we're seeing the movement. We just need to get it across the finish line. That's always the hardest part.
James, I recall maybe 15 years ago during the fracking revolution, Illinois. There's some shale deposits in Illinois. There was movement to allow fracking in Illinois, but it had to go through all these state levers and approvals, and they dragged their feet for so long that they missed that entire era of the fracking revolution by not getting their rules and regulations in place. So my question is, even if the federal regulations are lifted, how much say do potentially blue state governors, blue state legislatures have about what happens inside their states?
They always have a huge amount of say. It's their states, right? That federalism 101.
Hmm.
But like I hopefully a lot of states have learned, like Illinois and my home state, New York, have learned to not ignore the energy revolution right before us. They both missed out on the fracking boat, and New York's a lot poorer for it. Illinois is struggling
Hmm.
as well. Then you look at states like the Dakotas or out west, and you can see where the boom really happened. But you also see these blue states realizing there is an energy issue. They can't rely solely on renewables. It is just not
Yeah.
feasible because of climate, because of materials available, and other economic factors that they can neither foresee nor can control. But now you're seeing a really good push to accept an all of the above energy strategy. And hopefully that allows for real smart policies to get through and bad energy policies to finally go to the wayside. But we can only hope.
James Maroney, energy analyst at Americans for Prosperity, americansforprosperity.org. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
It's Daybreak with Steve and Ivy Gruber. Scott Bertram sitting in for Steve and Ivy this morning. Find me on X at Scott Bertram, SCOTBERTRAM, or over at scottbertram.com. Hour 2 of Daybreak brings Elizabeth Troutman Mitchell, White House reporter for the Daily Signal, and then a longer conversation with my friend Noah Rothman at National Review. His brand new book is Blood and Progress, A Century of Left-Wing Violence in America. We'll spend some time with Noah talking about that. This portion of the program brought to you by Musk Ox. If your flannel feels thin, flimsy, or worn out after one wash, you're doing it wrong. Musk Ox flannels are built differently. They're heavyweight, rugged, and really, really comfortable. They're not fashion flannels. They're made from thick, double-brushed cotton that holds up in cold weather, hard work, and real life. And they look great doing it. Even better, every Musk Ox flannel helps support wildlife conservation. Right now, you can score $15 off if you use the code HEAVYWEIGHT at gomuskox.com/heavyweight. That's gomuskox.com/heavyweight and use the promo code heavyweight. Stop buying weak flannels. Upgrade to Musk Ox flannels at gomuskox.com/heavyweight. We had a death yesterday that should be noted. Robert Woodson, a civil rights activist, a community leader, and a noted conservative author, died at the age of 89 years old. In 1981, he founded the National Center for Neighborhood Enterprise in Washington. It's now called the Woodson Center, and a really bright mind and a really bright light. He was here at Hillsdale's campus about 6 years ago. In 2020, did an online symposium, which you can find. Race in America Economics was the title of his address. I've linked it in my X feed, or you can find it on YouTube as well. Didn't get a chance to meet him when he was here, but I've talked to a few people who had met Robert Woodson in his life and said he was also the sweetest man. Robert Woodson passed away at the age of 89 years old. Back for hour 2 in just a few moments. Be with us, please. Scott Bertram in on Daybreak.
When the sun comes up on America, across open fields, small towns, and city streets, a new day begins. And here, we rise with it. This is where hard work meets headlines, where truth matters, and America wakes up informed.
An interesting week.
They all are. This is your country. This is your morning. This is Daybreak with Steve and Ivy Gruber. America, let's do it together.
Love you, Ivy.
Love you too.
And it starts right now.
Live from the campus of Hillsdale College in beautiful Hillsdale, Michigan, this is Scott Bertram sitting in for Steve and Ivy here on Daybreak on this Thursday, May 21st of 2026. And here are three big things you need to know. One, the indictment of former Cuban President Raul Castro being called a very big moment by President Trump. Trump adding that the indictment could create a domino effect that brings down Havana's communist regime. He said the indictment isn't the beginning, though, of an escalation of U.S. involvement in Cuba. Two, in a surprise to absolutely no one, New York City Mayor Zoran Mamdani will not be marching in the Israel parade on May 31st, breaking a long-standing tradition. It's believed that every New York City mayor has taken part since the first Israel parade back in 1964. Mamdani's been a harsh critic of Israel and a supporter of Palestinian rights. And number three, the launch of SpaceX's most powerful rocket to date could take place today. The Starship V3 is the tallest rocket ever assembled. It's set to make its first test flight from South Texas. Touted as the world's most powerful, reusable rocket, could be key to NASA's plan to return astronauts to the moon's surface and perhaps create a permanent moon base. That's where we start hour number 2 of the Daybreak with Steve and Ivy Gruber. Thanks so much for being with us this morning. Scott Bertram sitting in for Steve and Ivy. Coming up this hour, Elizabeth Troutman Mitchell, a reporter, White House reporter for the Daily Signal, co-host of the Daily Signal podcast. We'll ask about what's happening around President Trump this week. And Noah Rothman from National Review, his brand new book is Blood and Progress, A Century of Left-Wing Violence in America. We'll speak with him in depth about that book coming up later on in this hour 2 of Daybreak. Steve and Ivy off today and tomorrow. I'm back tomorrow, Monday, Memorial Day. Enjoy the day off. Many will get. And then Steve and Ivy back on Tuesday of next week. You can find me on X at Scott Bertram, SCOTBERTRAM. Also, scottbertram.com. I'm here at Hillsdale College, where I serve as the general manager of the student radio station, the award-winning WRFH, a lecturer in journalism. I teach our students here, and director of the Hillsdale College Podcast Network as well. You can hear me on various shows, podcasts, and fill-in opportunities all over the place, including for the past 10 years or so here for Steve on his program. Thanks for being alongside. We've got follow-up story. I always have said it'd be great. Maybe Barry Weiss is listening at CBS. I think a news department should have an official follow-up correspondent. We told you this story 6 weeks ago was big and massive and gigantic. And now here's what's happened. It seems we miss a lot of that. Well, here's a follow-up. Remember the Nick Shirley video? I think I was hosting the day after, the Monday after the weekend that dropped and became really viral and big. Nick Shirley, the YouTuber who was exposing fraud in Minnesota, in Minneapolis, St. Paul. Well, we've got some indictments as a result of that video. This Fox 9 story from Minneapolis. I love the way that they begin this. The head of a Minneapolis daycare that was featured in the controversial Nick Shirley video exposing daycare fraud in Minnesota is now facing federal charges for fraud. Now, you note they describe the Nick Shirley video as being controversial. Controversial, again, just meaning something the left doesn't like. What was controversial about it? Nick Shirley went daycare centers and showed you what was happening and how the fraud was taking place. He did the kind of journalism you used to expect from 60 Minutes and those on-the-ground, hard-nosed reporters at outlets all across the country. And now he has results. And his reward is being described as controversial because that will degrade and diminish the video and the reporting that he's done. All right. Anyway, we've got actual results here. We've got fraud charges. Um, Fahima Ige Mahmoud, charged on Wednesday with wire fraud and conspiracy to defraud the United States. Prosecutors say his daycare, called Future Leaders Early Learning, located near George Floyd Square in Minneapolis, was enrolled in the federal child nutrition program through Feeding Our Future and falsely claimed to have served thousands of meals at the daycare child care center. In total, prosecutors say the daycare pocketed more than $4.6 million from Minnesota's Child Care Assistance Program and an additional $850,000 from the federal child nutrition program. That is one child care center in Minneapolis. And as the Shirley video showed us, there are dozens and dozens like this in similar situations. Mahmoud was charged earlier this year for the Feeding Our Future scheme and charged on Wednesday for the daycare aspect of the fraud. That's the bigger one. That's the $4.6 million in fraud from the Child Care Assistance Program. Another daycare owner also charged on Wednesday. Jelaine Mertens ran three daycare centers in Minnesota, including Creative Stars Academy in Rochester, one in Casson, one in Ramsey, charged with wire fraud, claiming that she inflated hours worked by staff and made false claims about staff representation at her daycare center forms. Um, so you've got the beginnings now of some of these fraud charges coming through. We're going to revisit tomorrow. Robert Verbruggen, who's with the Manhattan Institute, has the new cover story in National Review about how we've got to get a handle on this fraud. Luke Rosiak, I don't have the cuts. Luke Rosiak testified in front of Congress yesterday, did a bunch of investigative reporting for the Daily Wire on fraud in Ohio. And it's just as bad as it is in Minnesota, which means if two of the 50 states have a massive fraud problem, there's a pretty decent chance many states have massive fraud problems across the country. Robert Verbruggen says we've got to get a handle on this. We've got to get this under control. And, for many years, you heard people say, well, we're going to root out waste, fraud, and abuse as a way to cut down our spending, as a way to get our deficits in line, and perhaps even bring down our debt. And for many, it was laughed off. It was, well, there's not that much. You can't find that much fraud. You can't find that much abuse as you run through what our governments are paying out. And I think what Nick Shirley and Luke Rosiak are showing us is maybe maybe you can. Maybe you can find that much fraud and abuse. Very quickly here, Karen Bass, the mayor of Los Angeles running for re-election, asked yesterday about non-citizens voting in Los Angeles. Her response here, cut one.
Councilmember Hugo Soto Martinez, who has endorsed you, he wants to explore ways to let non-citizens vote in city elections. I know that there are some cities that already do this, but politics is all about timing. With Donald Trump in the White House, is this the right time for Los Angeles to go down this path?
Well, I think we need to explore it. Now, I've not seen exactly what he's calling for. I have a little familiarity of what happens in other cities. And for example, some cities will allow people to vote in like city council and school board elections because they pay local taxes, but they are not necessarily undocumented. They might be here completely legally, but have not finished the citizenship process.
That's
so we'll
Karen
wait and
Bass
see.
saying we've got to expand citizen voting.
Did you know that American
It's Daybreak with Steve and Ivy Gruber. Scott Bertram sitting in for Steve and Ivy this morning. Also with you tomorrow as well. Thanks for being alongside. Elizabeth Troutman Mitchell joins the program, a White House reporter for the Daily Signal. Find her work at the Daily Signal and elsewhere. She's co-host of the Daily Signal podcast as well. Elizabeth, thanks so much for joining us here on Daybreak.
Thank you for having me. It's great to see you.
You can see a conversation you had with Kelly Loeffler earlier this week on your X feed and also over at the Daily Signal. It was the small business administrator for the Trump White House. What did she have to say about the strength of our small businesses, jobs being created across the country, and what the Trump administration is doing to help them out?
That's a great question. So I asked her about the situation with the economy, how it's affecting small businesses. It's no secret that small businesses are struggling with the rising prices of gas, groceries, oil, other items. And she acknowledged this. She said that prices are elevated, but that she expects this to be temporary while the president achieves his goals in Iran, and that she thinks the economy will bounce back better than ever after this is over. She expects we'll get back to those, I think she said 2.4% inflation levels that the Trump administration had before the war. She's very optimistic that this is going to come back soon after.
Does this White House and Kelly Loeffler as well understand the attack from Democrats on the issue of affordability? I've heard some on the right say, hey, it's not just a buzzword Democrats can and should be using. We've got to talk about affordability as well. We've got to talk about how to make things better, easier, especially with energy prices increasing, whether it's at the gas pump or I was going to say heating your home or cooling your home now as we enter the summer seasons. Is this White House acutely aware of this affordability issue?
I do think they are. I think I've heard almost every cabinet official talk about how important this is. We know it was something that the reason the vice president's been going on tours, doing rallies around the Midwest, other parts of the country about affordability is because they're trying to make this the issue of the midterms as well. I think Democrats do have a lot to go on right now, of course, with the high prices from the Iran war, but Republicans are really, it seems like what they've been focusing on particularly is the tax cuts and the One Big Beautiful Bill as a win for affordability, as well as things they've done for families, such as lowering the cost of childcare, Trump baby bonuses, things like that.
Elizabeth Troutman Mitchell with us, White House reporter for the Daily Signal. Find her at dailysignal.com and over on X as well. I'm curious, Elizabeth, as we see some polling numbers come in. There's an AP poll, I think, yesterday, day before, that had the president's overall job approval at under 40% or 39%, some of the lowest of this term or his first term. And President Trump seems to be the kind of guy who's aware, alert. He knows what those numbers are. Maybe it doesn't affect the way he governs, but he knows what those numbers are out there. Do you get the sense from the president himself or those around him that he's affected at all by seeing this slight decline and perhaps temporary decline in his approval numbers?
At least publicly, I think the president really focuses on the positive. He's always citing a CNN poll that says that he has 100% approval rate from Republicans on the Iran war, things like that. So I think that he is very hopeful that Republicans are going to win the midterms, despite the economy, despite what we're seeing in the polls. He's always saying that they're going to beat the odds, even though a sitting president usually loses the midterms. He thinks that the Republicans have a chance this time around. And so I think that he is likely seeing those polls, but probably focusing on some of the other ones.
This week, the president endorses Ken Paxton for the U.S. Senate in the primary in Texas against the incumbent John Cornyn, one of the longer tenured and in a leadership post in the U.S. Senate. This was, I want to say, a delayed endorsement, but it didn't come at the beginning of the process. We're a little closer to the end than the beginning. What do you think the calculus was? Why did the president come out in support of the challenger here in Texas, Ken Paxton?
That's a great question. I think it was very unclear for a long time if the president was going to endorse anyone at all in this race. And it's risky because the president says all the time he only likes to endorse winners. And so he's really banking on Ken Paxton. This means he thinks that Ken Paxton has what it takes to beat his Democrat opponent. He made a comment yesterday about his opponent, James Tallarico, that he's still wearing a mask in 2026. Who does that? Another classic comment from the president. But I think it is very interesting that he made the choice to weigh in here because, of course, Cornyn has been in the Senate for a long time, very established Senate Republican. And this is, not the first time we've seen this happening. The president came out swinging against Bill Cassidy, chair of the Health Committee. Of course, he destroyed Thomas Massie, lost his primary. Bill Cassidy lost his primary. So we've seen that the president's endorsement in these cases does play a very big role in who wins the primary. So I think we can expect to see Ken Paxton win now.
Elizabeth Troutman Mitchell with us from the Daily Signal, White House reporter there. Give us an overview of where we stand currently with the Iran war, the Iran conflict. It seems like every couple of days we're very close to restarting hostilities. And the president says, well, I've been asked to hold off. Negotiations continue. We're trying to find a way to stop this. What do you think the chances are that hostilities, that active targets resume here in this conflict with Iran?
I think that's a great question. I think the chances, unfortunately, are pretty high because the president, we know, had plans earlier this week to strike Iran the very next day, but that he changed his mind to allow some negotiations, deal making to go through. But he said Iran is walking on eggshells if they do not put forth a good deal, if they're negotiating in bad faith. He said that he absolutely is still willing to strike them. So I think that they're on very thin ice.
Elizabeth Troutman Mitchell, we've got about 45 seconds left here. What are you working on today and into the weekend over at the Daily Signal?
Thanks for asking. Well, we're expecting the president to sign an executive order on cybersecurity and AI safety either today or tomorrow. So I'm looking out for that. Had a story out on that yesterday, and I'll be at the White House today. So you can see me wherever the president's doing. He has an administration. He has a announcement with Lee Zeldin at 10 a.m. as well. So I'll be there.
Lee Zeldin, one of the standout members of the cabinet, absolutely. And you're home away from home now, the White House and the press briefing room there. Elizabeth Troutman Mitchell, reporter, White House reporter for the Daily Signal. Follow her work at the Daily Signal. Also find her on X as well, doing a great job. Elizabeth, thanks so much for joining us this morning here on Daybreak.
Thanks for having me.
Appreciate it. Scott Bertram sitting in for Steve and Ivy this morning. Back in a moment with more on Daybreak. Welcome back. Daybreak with Steve and Ivy Gruber. Scott Bertram sitting in for Steve and Ivy this morning. After the weekend, we've got a new Forgotten America coming up. Steve and Ivy sit down with Ann Funder, a mother turned national fentanyl awareness advocate after losing her 15-year-old son, Weston, to a counterfeit pill laced with fentanyl. Weston thought he was taking something harmless. Instead, it killed him. And now Ann is speaking out about what she says is one of the biggest failures facing American families today. Deadly counterfeit pills flooding communities across the country, while parents are left completely unaware of how easy these drugs are for kids to access. It's emotional, it's urgent, it's conversation every parent and grandparent needs to hear. And here's a sneak preview.
My son, when he went to public school for the first time, was in high school, second semester, freshman year. He found a new crowd that he just kind of wanted to be friends with. And I think it just, peer pressure would have it that that he tried something when everybody else was, and it took his life. And it was pure fentanyl and blue press powder. It was a counterfeit pill. It wasn't real. And, he was told it was Percocet. So that was deception. It's absolutely deception when they tell you it's like you ordering something at a bar and them giving you, a colored liquid and cyanide. There's no difference. It's complete poisoning. My son's case was treated as a murder investigation because that's what it is when you deceive someone like that. Had my son taken a Percocet, he'd still be alive. So, but this was the story. It's not going to happen to me, and it did, and I assure you, it could happen to you as well.
Not just about drugs, it's about whether the system is protecting American families or leaving them to deal with a crisis on their own. Forgotten America with Steve and Ivy Gruber featuring Ann Fundner, dropping Monday, 9 a.m. on YouTube. Find it there. Search for Steve Gruber and find Forgotten America. Don't miss it. Forgotten America with Steve and Ivy Gruber. New episode dropping on Monday. Up next, my friend Noah Rothman is with us. His book out this week, Blood and Progress, a century of left-wing violence in America. We'll discuss in depth with Noah in just a couple of moments. Scott Bertram sitting in for Steve and Ivy this morning. You're on Daybreak. Welcome back. Daybreak with Steve and Ivy Gruber. Scott Bertram sitting in for Steve and Ivy this morning. Find me on X at Scott Bertram, SCOTBERTRAM, or scottbertram.com. The show's out there, stevegruber.com or at Steve Gruber Show on X. Celebrating a birthday today, former U.S. Senator Al Franken turns 75 years old today. Senator from '09 to 18 before he resigned. Also, one of the original writers on Saturday Night Live from 75 to 80, and then again from 85 to 90. And one of those guys, though I disagree with all of his political stances virtually. Have to admit, he's a pretty talented guy when it comes to writing comedy because some of the funniest stuff in show history is from the pen of Al Franken and Tom Davis. 75 years old today for Al Franken. We welcome into the program an old friend, Noah Rothman, senior writer at National Review. His brand new book is out this week. It's called A Century of Left-Wing Violence in America, Blood in Progress, A Century of Left-Wing Violence in America. Noah, thanks so much for joining us here on Daybreak.
Thank you so much for having me, Scott.
The book takes us through, as the subhead indicates, 100 years or so of left-wing violence in America. And in particular, it begins with these past 5 years or so since 2020 and has the receipts, all of these incidents. And when you stack them up in a single chapter, it does somewhat take your breath away. And I believe in the intro, you say the American left either refuses to confront or they're comfortable with a certain level of domestic political violence. Why does there exist this permission structure and these cues that encourage in some way political violence from the left?
Well, first, you've probably heard that the American right is preternaturally violent, that the primary threat to the American Civic Compact comes from the violent right. You hear that all the time. In fact, you hear it more often because it is usually the rejoinder to an episode of confirmed or suspected left-wing violence, an attack on an ICE and CBP facility, an attempted or successful assassination of a right-wing figure, the mobs that descend almost nightly on American cities. Just don't worry about it. That's, the right is what's really the problem in this country. Increasingly, it conflicts with the evidence of your own eyes, and it tends now, I think, to serve as an excuse for institutionalists and establishmentarians on the left to avoid confronting the rising tide of left-wing political violence in this country. And when you look at, as I did, the last 125 years or so, the American history is peppered with anarchistic and socialistic violence, and it comes in waves, from the anarchistic bombings of the 1910s, 1920s, to the Marxist terror cells of the 70s and 80s, to today, all the hits, right? And yet, there's no confrontation with this. It's not an obscure history. It's a suppressed history, I argue. And it is suppressed through misclassified, misapplied data sets, through an academic culture that insists violent left-wing activism is a myth, to campaigns to intimidate actual researchers into this project. As one document that was prepared for the Department of Homeland Security in 2021 alleged, that researchers into left-wing extremist violence face intimidation campaigns, social isolation, reputational harm, even the threat of physical retribution for their work, to say nothing of the fact that left-wing activists are often involved in the study of left-wing and violent extremism and therefore shade the conclusions of those studies. It's a fairly fraught enterprise. It's one that I believe has been manipulated to present a political conclusion to the political left, one that compels them to look away, to avoid confronting the violent activists on their end of the spectrum. And until they do, we're going to encounter a condition in which we have more violence in this country, because the victims of that violence don't simply absorb it. It's a reciprocal phenomenon, and it feeds on itself. So if you're only looking at one side of the equation, you're never going to get your hands around the problem.
There's a history lesson in Blood in Progress over those last 125 years or so. I learned more about Samuel Melville from the bombings in New York City in 1969. Bill Ayers and Bernadine Dorn. Bill Ayers, people might remember him from the Obama campaign, where he became a good friend of Barack Obama over the years. Both members of the Weathermen, a terrorist organization, bombings, deaths. They've been rehabilitated, and there are so many members of the left involved in this domestic violence that have been rehabilitated, welcomed back into society. You say it says a lot about the country that they tried to break. How and why do so many who commit this left-wing violence find themselves re-entering into normal society?
Well, it says a lot about the country, in our country, in good ways. If you're the instruments of the socialist revolution in communist countries find themselves to be less than useful after the revolution is over, and the demands of regime survival compel them to mute the permanent revolutionary tendency in the insurgent class that brought them to power. It's one thing to be rehabilitated if you're penitent. It's another to be completely unrepentant and be yet again ingratiated and welcomed back into polite society, as Bill Ayres was. Bill Ayres was kind of a distant memory when his rehabilitation tour began in the pages of the New York Times, and in which he described his regret at having not achieved more of his political objectives through the application of deadly violence. And that sort of fortuitously appeared in the pages of the New York Times in print on the morning of September 11, 2001, kind of a quirk of history there. And yes, there's cults, he is a respected academic, and there's a staid academic culture that has looked past the activities of these militant Marxian guerrilla movements because their hearts were in the right place. But there's more than just Bill Ayres and Bernardine Dohrn who were respectable academics. Assata Shakur enjoyed a very similar reputational rehabilitation program. Was, again, totally unrepentant, but by no means an academic. She was involved in a police shooting on the side of a New York highway, was arrested, broke out of prison, lived the rest of her life comfortably, by all accounts, a fugitive from American justice in communist Cuba. And yet there's a profound amount of rehabilitative work, literature, talk around her. She had buildings named for her on college campuses. Her work is studied in curricula across the country, and on and on and on. There are cults around these people which give permission to aspiring left-wing militants to go execute the directives that the permanent revolution would have them mete out. And we've recently learned, for example, that there are 2 students who were killed fighting in the Philippines for a Marxian guerrilla movement. The Manhattan Institute has a really good piece on this, how they were driven to that by their activist academic adults, elders in their lives. These influential people who would otherwise be a moderating influence in earlier generations are now the precise opposite. They are radicalizing.
Noah Rothman with us. We have to break here. We'll come back and talk a little bit more about Blood and Progress, a century of left-wing violence in America, about what to do about it, and also why some on the left are mislabeling, misrepresenting quote-unquote, right-wing violence when it is simply self-defense or good Samaritan actions by those out there. You know about some of those stories. We'll ask Noah about that in a minute. The brand new book is Blood and Progress, a century of left-wing violence in America. Noah Rothman with us here on Daybreak with Steve and Ivy Gruber. Back in just a couple of minutes for more with Noah Rothman here on Daybreak. It's Daybreak with Steve and Ivy. Gruber Scott Bertram sitting in for Steve and Ivy this morning. Noah Rothman is with us. His brand new book, it's really fantastic. Blood in Progress, A Century of Left-Wing Violence in America. A few more minutes with Noah here. Noah, we saw this week these, I don't want to call them reporters, these people with press passes in New York talking about the assassination of Brian Thompson and essentially saying that the victim is worse than the criminal in this case, saying he deserved it, his kids deserved it, and this leads to a question you bring up in the book, which is why has the progressive activist class inverted this moral distinction between criminal and victim? In their mind, why is the victim worse than the criminal?
Yeah, that one was a really illustrative event. The degree to which there was some competitive ghoulishness there, and sort of a slip against an admission against interest, in my view, by one of these individuals, Lena Weinbrock, who said, this is why don't we have a revolution? Where is the revolution? This is it's sort of a David Horowitz had this quote about the SDS, a bunch of student radicals in the 1960s, that the issue is never the issue. The issue is always the revolution. And for the militant, violent left, the issue is always the revolution. And yeah, going back, this is a series of misconceptions, back to the permission structure we were talking about. In one chapter, I described the degree to which the left does tend to confuse itself when it comes to criminal self-defense and political violence. Daniel Penny was one. Daniel Penny was a subway rider in New York City. With the help of his fellow passengers, subdued a violent vagrant on the car, applied a chokehold. The chokehold was too strong, ended up killing the person. A jury acquitted him, said it was self-defense, but it was that jury verdict was rejected. It still is rejected by many on the left who regard this as vigilantism, political violence, because it was supported by the American right. He was hailed as a hero by Republicans. They don't see the distinction between that and self-defense as defined by a jury verdict. Likewise, Kyle Rittenhouse, who is maybe a less sympathetic figure because he put himself in a violent place rather than find himself one unbeknownst. But nevertheless, they also see his self-defense as determined by a jury as being an invalid verdict, just by virtue, in part by virtue of the fact that he has a lot of supporters on the American right, and also because they see in him a privileged individual, a white person, this comes up very frequently, who should have never been in that place in the first place, because we were in the middle of executing a retributive justice and leveling the social scales. And what was he doing? Disrupting that process. I mean, this is the sort of dialogue you hear. And this excessive empathy, as I define it, in which you see criminals as victims and victims as agents of systemic oppression, leads us to the Progressive Prosecutor Project, in which cities across this country elected prosecutors who decided to stop prosecuting crime based on the presumption that those people were put in that place by systemic forces. They are themselves victims of circumstance, and they should not be re-victimized by the state merely for having violated criminal statutes, things like that. So yeah, it's a cognitive problem, a cognitive error that I think greases the skids for political violence, or at least gives the deluded the perception that their acts of violence will be welcomed by the people who they find influential.
Noah Rothman, his new book is Blood in Progress. Noah, there have been these incidences of violence recently in which, to a rational observer, it's clear it's left-wing violence. There's a clear motive that comes from the left-wing rhetoric, beliefs. But there's also this one thing that maybe he's a Nick Fuentes fan or something, where he's part of the right, and then people say, well, it's just, he's just radicalized. Just kind of I think like a salad bar theory of ideological extremism, I've seen it described as. Is it important to push back against that people who are clearly influenced by the left wing and committing left wing violence aren't just simply some sort of wild out there, radical from all stripes?
Well, one of the things I do in this book is not break things down into statistics and flatten these individuals and their actions, many of which are fueled by deluded thinking. I mean, if you think an act of bloodshed is going to beget positive social change, you've skipped over a lot of parts there, and you're engaged in some disordered thinking. And if you flatten that out into statistics, you can fail to capture the full breadth of what this person was thinking, what he was influenced by, and the degree to which he takes inspiration from elements of society that maybe we should give a second look. One of the problems that we encounter when there's an act of left-wing violence, and then the American left says, well, look at all the statistics that say the American right is the most violent threat to society. When you dig into those statistics, you find a lot of dubious stuff that is meant to support the conclusion that the left wants. Prison violence, gang violence, intra-family violence, somebody who spray paints the side of a church with graffiti, right-wing violence, a homeless person who walks into a hotel and assaults a hotelier while hurling racial slurs, right-wing violence. This is sort of not what people mean when they talk about political violence. It's like those databases that say there's been a half a dozen school shootings this week, and what they're talking about is the discharge of a firearm adjacent to a school property. Or there's been a bunch of mass shootings this week, and what they mean is there was gang violence in which everybody who was a participant in that action knew each other. It's just not what people are thinking about. But those create misleading statistics, and the misleading headline, which is what those statistics are designed to fuel, creates a misperception that is advantageous to those who are in the activist space. And in the left, they flood the zone with dubious narratives about how the right is preternaturally violent, uniquely and excessively violent, and it gives them permission to look the other way from their own side. This book, Blood and Progress, A Century of Left-Wing Violence in America, is designed to force them to confront their own, or at least their own misconceptions.
Noah, 60 seconds here before we've got to run. You say at the end, you're not sure what to do about this, but we've got to answer the question, is this the kind of country we want to live in? My guess is most people, almost everyone would say no. So why does it continue?
Of course not. Yeah. Well, because there's an element of cowardice. As I said at the outset, there are real repercussions for getting on the wrong side of this debate. But it's not as though I have no recommendations. I'm just out here saying, I will not solve the problem of political violence in America. It has been with us since the founding. Anybody who says otherwise is selling you something. But there are definitely recommendations that I have. Foremost among them is to model the behavior that we want to see in the world. And too few do that. It's not as though right-wing violence doesn't exist. It does. That would be a child's argument. What we must confront are the radicals on our own side and endorse the notion that if you are violent, you are not on my side. That seems very hard for political activists.
Noah Rothman, Blood and Progress, A Century of Left-Wing Violence in America, available now. Thanks for joining us. It's Daybreak with Steve and Ivy Gruber. Scott Bertram sitting in for Steve and Ivy this morning. Sports time. Brock has the latest.
With a look at sports, I'm Brock Palmbush. The Oklahoma City Thunder evened up the NBA's Western Conference Finals at one game apiece with a 122-113 victory over the San Antonio Spurs in Game 2 last night in Oklahoma City. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander led 7 Thunder players in double figures with 30. Stephon Castle led the Spurs with 25. Game 3 of the series tomorrow night in San Antonio. Carter Hart stopped 36 shots and led the Vegas Golden Knights to a 4-2 victory over the Colorado Avalanche in Game 1 of the NHL's Western Conference Finals last night in Denver. Nick Dowd sealed the win with an empty net goal with 45 seconds left. Game 2 of the series tomorrow night in Denver. In Major League Baseball, a full schedule. American League winners included Tampa Bay, Minnesota, and Texas. National League winners included Atlanta, Cincinnati, and Arizona. In the WNBA, there were 3 games. Winners were Indiana, Dallas, and Connecticut. That's a look at sports. Back to you, Scott.
Thanks, Brock. Appreciate it. This portion of Daybreak brought to you by Birch Gold. When there are supply constraints on commodities, prices surge. You saw it with fuel prices when the Strait of Hormuz was blockaded. And you know what else is a limited commodity? It's gold. They mine it out of the ground, and when it's gone, it's gone. Governments can't print more of it. That's why everyone from central banks to savvy savers are diversified with gold. If you've been thinking about it for years but have still never moved some of your savings into physical gold, Birch Gold Group is there now through May 29th. That's 8 days away. Birch Gold is giving a first-time gold buyer a rebate of up to $10,000 on qualifying purchases. For details and a free information kit on diversifying into gold, text America to the number 989898. Birch Gold can help you convert an existing IRA or 401k into a tax-sheltered IRA in physical gold. Text America to the number 989898. See if you qualify for a first-time gold buyer rebate of up to $10,000. Again, America to 989898 for Birch Gold. Thanks again to Noah Rothman, longtime friend, for joining us. His brand new book is excellent. Blood in Progress, A Century of Left-Wing Violence in America. Hour 3, continue with us, please. Jesse Arm is going to join us, one of my newfound followers. I like him a lot. He's VP of External Affairs with the Manhattan Institute. He's a first-time guest with me and with you, I think, too. We'll talk with him in Hour 3. Come on back. More of Daybreak. Scott Bertram in for Steve and Ivy.
America's awake, and we're just getting started. The headlines that matter, the stories they won't tell you, and the voices fighting to be heard. This is your country, your morning, your daybreak with Steve and Ivy Gruber. A new hour starts right now.
Live from the campus of Hillsdale College in beautiful Hillsdale, Michigan, this is Scott Bertram sitting in for Steve and Ivy here on Daybreak. It's Thursday, May 21st of 2026, and here are three big things you need to know. One, an aircraft carrier strike group has arrived in the Caribbean amid tensions between the U.S. and Cuba. Comes as the Justice Department has charged former Cuban President Raul Castro with murder over a 1996 incident where Cuban fighter jets shot down two planes operated by a group of Miami-based Cuban exiles, killing 4. 2, a wildfire burning north of Los Angeles, forcing tens of thousands to evacuate there. California officials say the Sandy fire has burned more than 2,100 acres near Simi Valley and was 22% contained as of last night. And number 3, it's a sad day for all of us, and somehow we'll make it through. But tonight is the final episode of The Late Show with Stephen Colbert. It's also the final episode of The Late Show entirely, on the air since David Letterman started hosting back in 1993. As Colbert leaves, The Late Show also leaves the CBS airwaves. Tonight's the last show. I'll have a few thoughts tomorrow as we see tonight how Colbert disgraces himself, and I'm sure it's going to happen. And I'll have some thoughts about Colbert tomorrow. But if you were going to set the DVR or catch it online, Stephen Colbert's last show tonight. Again, we'll all miss him terribly. I don't know what we'll do without him. Scott Bertram sitting in for Steve and Ivy this morning here on Daybreak with Steve and Ivy Gruber. Find me on X at Scott Bertram, SCOTBERTRAM, or scottbertram.com, where I corral all my media doings. You can hear me hosting the Radio Free Hillsdale Hour on many of these radio stations on the weekend, also in podcast form as well on the Hillsdale College Podcast Network. It's a big fill-in time, summer starting, filling in on the 3 Martini Lunch podcast today and tomorrow as well. You can find me there too. And I'm back tomorrow morning with you here on Daybreak with Steve and Ivy Gruber. Thanks for joining us. This hour, Jesse Arm is going to join us from the Manhattan Institute. He wrote something earlier this month about the Michigan U.S. Senate race, which we'll talk about. But I found Jesse recently. I'm sure he's been there forever, but he was showing up in my X feed, followed him, really enjoy his commentary and insights. We'll have him join us later on this hour. And then former U.S. Senator, former Tennessee governor, former White House official, he's done it all in politics, Lamar Alexander will join us. His new memoir is called The Education of a Senator, and we'll discuss a whole lot with Lamar Alexander coming up later this hour as well, so please do stick around for that. If you've been on X the past couple of days, you might have seen this discourse that has, and it comes every now and then, and I can't even remember how this popped up. Someone somewhere mentioned it's impossible for young people to live because they have to pay $28 a day for lunch. Now, most of you are saying, "What? That's ridiculous. Why would you pay $28 a day for lunch?" We'll come to that point in a second. But that was the argument that, these young people, these millennials, Generation Z, they've got it so tough because their money is not going as far as it used to. Prices of everything is going up, energy costs going up, gas prices going up, and then lunch costs $28 a day. And the discourse began about why you would pay $28 a day for lunch and if it were necessary. And you had people like Taylor Lawrence on the left saying, well, you can't expect these people to work hard and make a lunch. You can't expect these people to work hard and cook things at home. It's mandatory. You've got to eat out. You got to have food delivered to you, which is a ridiculous argument to make as far as I'm concerned. And apparently there's polling on this. There's polling on everything. Zoomers and Gen Z especially, millennials too, eating out at ridiculously high race. And there's this assumption that restaurants are a basic necessity and not just an occasional treat for young people. This study survey this is from the end of 2023. So we're 2 years past this, which probably means it's getting worse. Among Gen Z, 46% of food costs for Gen Z are on restaurants, 22% on delivery, and the other 32% on buying groceries. So two-thirds of food spending for Gen Z is either on restaurants or delivery, and the markups that come along with that. You compare that to, say, baby boomers, 34% restaurant, 62% grocery, and 4% delivery. Gen X, my generation, maybe your generation, 53% grocery, 38% restaurant, 9% delivery. There is this notion that has taken over among some of the youth these days that those benefits of having worked hard and having increased your salary and having saved a bit of money and not perhaps having credit card debt and not having a massive mortgage anymore, that those things should be available to you the second you graduate from college and get your first job. Well, now I can buy what was the avocado toast and have it delivered to me for $30, whatever it might be. I occasionally am asked by seniors here at Hillsdale to be on a panel or to talk a bit about what life is like post graduation. What's it like to get that first job? How do you make ends meet? How do you budget? How do you do these simple, oh, maybe not simple, how do you do these basic things of living life after you leave the confines of college when you graduate? And maybe it's no surprise to some of you out there, but our graduates are going into the world of media, be it journalists, people working. We have our graduates this year. We have two going to the Wall Street Journal, one going to the Washington Post op-ed page, one working at the Washington Stand in D.C. We have people working media all over the place, and media jobs aren't the best paying jobs normally as a first job out of college. And especially if you're going to work in New York City or Washington, D.C., where a lot of our grads do go, cost of living is even higher there. And so I get asked to be on these panels and how does this work and how do you make that work? And one of the biggest questions is how do you balance a budget? How do you make sure you're not spending more than you take in when you start? And the number one piece of advice that I give to these students is don't eat out. And my apologies to my restaurant friends out there. I love you. I love heading out to a restaurant, taking the family. But I'm also have been a professional now for 25 years ish, built up a bit of equity. You could afford those kind of things. If you're starting out, these graduates ask, the best way to save money is don't eat out. Buy the ingredients, make your own food. Even in a worst case scenario, frozen food section, pre-made meals, that's still cheaper than going out for lunch every day, getting food delivered every day. But there is this assumption by many young people these days that restaurants are a necessity. Eating out is necessary. I need to make a salary that will allow me to spend 25, $30 on lunch every day. I got to tell you, even when you can do that, it's still bad advice. It's still a bad idea to spend that kind of money on lunch every day. I don't know anyone around here who does that. Scott Bertram sitting in for Steve and Ivy here on Daybreak. We're all It's Daybreak with Steve and Ivy Gruber. Scott Bertram sitting in for Steve and Ivy this morning. Going back to 1977 this morning. Stevie Wonder, one of the most wholesome tunes of all time, as my Political Beats co-host Jeff Blair says. Sir Duke, fantastic song from Stevie Wonder, starting a 3-week run at number one on the charts back on this day in 1977. Thanks so much for joining us. We welcome to the program Jesse Arm. He's Vice President of External Affairs with the Manhattan Institute, and also on X at Jesse_Leg. See, it's Jesse Arm, and his Twitter handle, X handle, Jesse_Leg. Jesse, thanks so much for joining us here on Daybreak.
Thanks for having me. Good to be with you, Scott.
Our first time talking, and I was explaining to you off air, I for whatever reason, you started showing up often in my retweets, reposts on X, and I try to keep my follows relatively small so I can actually see the people I want to see, and eventually said, oh, well, Jesse's a guy I want to hear more from. So I really enjoy your insight and commentary, and so I want to encourage our listeners and viewers to also give you a follow over on X at Jesse_Leg. For those who do, what can they expect?
Well, they can expect a fair bit. I work at the Manhattan Institute, which is a public policy think tank. We do a lot of work to defend colorblind meritocracy, economic dynamism, and we care a lot about cities. That differentiates us from a lot of the other sort of right of center policy organizations. But we think that cities are engines of opportunity, and America's cities, even if they're often pretty deep blue places, deserve a little tender love, and we're going to deliver it to them with recommendations that encourage economic growth as well as safe streets without apology. And that's going to mean putting ne'er-do-well criminals behind bars sometimes. So sometimes our city leaders need a reminder of that in the United States.
I hope we talk again in the future. Today, though, I wanted to discuss two Michigan topics because you are a Michigan native from the Detroit area. You wrote a piece earlier over at dailywire.com this month about Michigan Democrats at a crossroads. This is a very interesting three-way primary for the Democrats in Michigan, and polling is kind of all over the place, but it's tight. It's tight among these three candidates on the ballot. What does the preference of Democratic voters among these three candidates say about the future of the party here in Michigan?
Yeah. Well, it's a very interesting race that's shaping up in Michigan. It's my home state, like you mentioned. And not only that, but my home community of West Bloomfield was recently making national headlines when an Islamist terrorist who came to the United States and the Dearborn area via Lebanon as an immigrant during the Obama administration or the Biden administration, I can't remember which, but rammed a explosive-laden truck into Michigan's largest synagogue in the town where I grew up. So I've been paying a lot of attention to happenings around my state, particularly because one of the leading Senate candidates on the Democratic side of the aisle chose to equivocate when it came to saying who was responsible for that act of terror that happened in our backyard. That's Abdul El Sayed. And according to prediction markets right now, he is the leading contender to be the Democratic nominee for Senate. El Sayed is a unique politician. Michiganders will probably recognize his name. He's run for office in the Wolverine state before without success. He is a medical professional by training of some kind. He appears to have done some work in public health. Whether or not he was ever a practicing physician is somewhat unclear. I'll leave listeners and viewers to check out the reporting that's been done on that question online. But he is a far left character. He is someone who is a socialist. He is someone who flirts with what I call in that piece over at the Daily Wire that you just mentioned, an Islamo-leftist. He is someone who makes great apologies for ideologies which have been imported into the United States from the third world. And he is running against two other slightly more mainstream Democratic candidates. One is Mallory McMorrow, a state legislator who has become a sort of staple on MSNBC, MS Now, whatever they're calling it now, a favorite of the kind of wine mom liberal genre of voter. She's sort of ill-defined. It's not entirely clear what she stands for. She's trying to make herself appealing to both more moderate and more hard left voters within this Democratic primary. And then there's Haley Stevens, who's been a downstate congressman for quite some time. She's higher on name ID, but she's catching a lot of flack because she's actually swimming against the tide in the Democratic Party, in the sense that she is not someone who is an total apologist for Islamist terror regimes. She has support from APAC and some other moderate groups. A lot of former state lawmakers have endorsed Haley Stevens. The majority of Congress endorsements in this rate, sitting members of Congress from the Democratic Party have endorsed Haley Stevens. So she is sort of the favorite of the Democratic establishment and the most moderate option.
And the ex-governor endorsing her this week as well. And speaking of the governor's race, we got about 60 seconds left here. Jesse Arm with us from the Manhattan Institute. You're also keeping an eye on the governor's race, where we have a Democrat turned independent in Mike Duggan, who is making it a three-way race there, too, along with the Democratic nominee, likely Jocelyn Benson, Republican, probably John James. We'll see. Mike Duggan, though, is he still just a Democrat in independence clothing?
I think Mike Duggan is running an interesting campaign. I don't know, this just past week, he said at a candidate forum that if right to work legislation were to be passed, he would veto it. Now, what is right to work? It's essentially giving members the choice of whether or not they get to decide to be part of their union. We had that in Michigan for a while. It was popular with voters in this state. It was economically good for this state. But we rolled it back, or rather Democrats in the state legislature and Gretchen Whitmer rolled it back. So Duggan saying that he would veto something that pretty clearly on paper did well for the state on day one suggests to me that maybe he's not too different from who we knew as the mayor of Detroit, the Democrat who ran Detroit.
Jesse Arm is Vice President of External Affairs at the Manhattan Institute. Find him on X, as I did, at Jesse_Leg, and hope to have you back soon. Jesse, thanks so much for joining us here on Daybreak.
Thanks for having me.
Appreciate it. More next. Scott Bertram in for Steve and Ivy. It's Daybreak with Steve and Ivy Gruber. Scott Bertram in for Steve and Ivy today. And tomorrow, Monday, Memorial Day, have a great one. And then Steve and Ivy back on Tuesday. This portion of the program brought to you by Ghost Bed. You think a mattress is just furniture? Well, not if you grab a Ghost Bed. They don't build mattresses like furniture. They build engineered sleep systems. They're serious about this. Health equipment. Their beds designed for your relief and recovery, not looks, not fluff. Your body should be healing while you're asleep, not fighting for comfort. If you're waking up stiff, you're tossing and turning, you're sleeping hot, even reaching for a pain reliever before bed, hoping tonight might be different, that's not just aging, that could be your mattress talking. And with Ghost Bed, you get 101 free nights. If you have 101 Dalmatians, you can have a night with each of them on the Ghost Bed before you can send it back risk-free if you don't like it before that, if you don't feel the difference. Ghost Bed's currently running their Memorial Day sale, plus an extra 10% off for the Steve Gruber and Daybreak audience. Ghostbed.com/Gruber. Use the promo code Gruber. That's ghostbed.com/Gruber. Promo code Gruber for Ghost Bed. We're going to talk with former U.S. Senator, former Tennessee Governor Lamar Alexander in just about 5 minutes. So stick around. His new memoir, The Education of a Senator. News from MIT. A researcher there is helping to launch an at-home test for Lyme disease. This is somewhat personal to me. I don't have Lyme disease, but I thought I might have, last summer. Inside of my thigh, not to be so personal and graphic, had a welt, and it was kind of bullseye shaped. And I thought, oh boy, I'm in trouble because we got about an acre out here and there's some wooded areas. And I thought, it's not good. And I was not feeling great. And I had stiffness. Maybe I needed a ghost bed. And I went to the doctor. They did the test and they said, nope, it's not Lyme disease, but we have no idea what it is. Maybe a spider bite. Don't know. But it wasn't Lyme disease. Now, an at-home test called Lyme Alert allows people to quickly test ticks for the infection. Wouldn't have helped me because I didn't have the tick anymore. It can detect Lyme disease within 15 minutes. The goal to provide peace of mind and early treatment options. A limited batch of those test kits available this summer called Lyme Alert. All right, Lamar Alexander up next here on Daybreak. It's Daybreak with Steve and Ivy Gruber. Back into the world of music history. Stan Lynch, longtime drummer for Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers. Really good one, too. You hear him there on Here Comes My Girl. Stan Lynch turned 71 years old today. Member of the Heartbreakers through 1996 or so when he was kicked out of the band. Some personal differences with Tom Petty, but a great player. Stan Lynch is 71 years old today. Maybe should have played Rocky Top. Maybe that would have been a better idea. As we welcome into the program former Senator Lamar Alexander, his new memoir, a personal history called The Education of a Senator from JFK to Trump. It is out and available now. Senator Alexander, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for inviting me.
We could spend most of the segment just running down your background in politics. Staff of Senator Howard Baker, aide in the White House, two-term Tennessee governor, U.S. Senator, education secretary, 2 bids for the presidency. But I want to ask about the cover of the book because there's an old saying, of course, if you want a friend in D.C., get a dog. Your dog, I believe that's Rufus, if I'm not mistaken. Is that why he made the cover? Because he's your friend in D.C.?
No, he's my friend in Tennessee. He's my friend. He's my Cavalier dog, my friend in Tennessee. He got famous.
Right.
I chaired a hearing back
Right.
during the COVID days, and it was the first virtual hearing that we ever had in the Senate. And Rufus was sitting on the back table while I interviewed Dr. Fauci, and he got famous.
You can see that online about 6 years ago. Yeah. Early in the book, I think it's in the introduction, Senator, you say that public service is the surest way to unleash our country's potential to help the most people. Now, some conservatives will hear that and think, oh, that's big government. That's how can government get involved in our lives and how can we move money here and put it over there? What is your perhaps conservative understanding of that statement? How our government can unleash our country's potential to help people?
Well, I'll give you 2 examples. One is if you want to cut taxes, you can't do that as a private citizen. That unleashes potential. 2 is if in 2015 I spent a year working to fix No Child Left Behind, passed a bill that sent most decisions about kindergarten through the 12th grade back to states. The Wall Street Journal said it was the biggest devolution of power to the states in 25 years. Newt Gingrich said it was the biggest conservative bill in 25 years. You can't do that as a private citizen. You'd have to be in the Senate.
The CARES Act probably is part of that too. I hope we have time to talk about that a little bit later on in the conversation. There are great stories inside The Education of a Senator, which include how you took office the first time as Tennessee governor and the second inaugural address as you were in 1983. Great stories there too. I'm intrigued by this question, which you address in, well, it's on page 321 in my notes. This idea that perhaps some people are better governors, some people are better senators, depending on their strengths and disposition. You did both jobs. Did you feel like you were better at one or the other? And do you think it's true that people are perhaps have better strengths to do one of those 2 jobs?
I think they do. I think I was a better governor. They're very different jobs. I mean, the governor's job is like Moses, here's a problem, schools aren't good. Here's a strategy, pay teachers more for teaching well. Then you persuade half the people you're right. And if you're like I was, you're working with a Democratic legislature. So they come up with their ideas. You have to work out a compromise and you have to get a practical result. In the Senate, there are 100 people. It operates by unanimous consent. If you want to get anything done, you're more like a drum major leading a band down the street. You pick the music, you try to keep them from marching into the ditch. You pick a few soloists, you might get a result. The Senator McConnell of the former Republican leader says that any senator who's been a governor who tells you he prefers being a senator will lie about other things. A lot of governors who are used to getting a result come to the Senate and are in despair about it. And a lot of senators used to being ideological, they'll go to the governor's office and try to just be ideological and they don't know what to do. So there are not many switch hitters, people who are good at being senator and good at being governor.
Former Senator Lamar Alexander, his book, The Education of a Senator from JFK to Trump. I want to ask about a couple of specific presidents in a minute, but first about your attempts to become president, 2 attempts to win the Republican nomination. You even made a cameo appearance on Saturday Night Live at a cold open Halloween sketch, which I enjoyed quite a bit. What did you learn about America by having to go outside of Tennessee to ask for votes? You traveled across the country, of course, to Iowa and New Hampshire most specifically. What did you learn from those two runs for office?
Well, I was reminded of how big and complicated and different our country is, which is this great strength. And it even convinced me more that we need to expect less of Washington and more of ourselves, because there's no way a central government can make this country work successfully. It's just too big and too different and too complex. You've got to give people room to be themselves and do their different things. That's what I learned.
Every year, Senator, I take students to New York City for college radio awards and convention. And we go to the top of a tall building. The past few years, it's been 30 Rock. And I get to the top of 30 Rock and I look out on New York City. And what I think is, who is the person that looks out on all this and thinks, yeah, I can govern this. Like, I can decide what's best for all these millions of people that I see in front of me. That reminds me of how vast and populous this country is and how local is better than federal in a lot of issues.
Yeah, local is better, and if we try to do much from the central government, we found that out with education. We had this thing called Common Core curriculum, and it was
Mhm.
really developed by governors and states. Were the governor of Michigan, John Engler, was one of those who did it. It was working pretty well state by state, but as soon as President Obama and his administration seemed to require it of states, that top down requirement of what you need to teach in the schools, the whole thing blew up.
Senator, I want to ask about presidents. You've worked with 10 presidents during your time, and we're gonna continue the conversation after a break here in a minute. But you said Ronald Reagan. Of all the presidents you work with, you found Reagan to be the one who best fit the job. What do you consider to be those boxes that you need to check, and why was Reagan the best fit for that?
Well, I put character and temperament first. The job. As you say, I've seen 10 presidents up close, and the job is so big, so much going on, so nuanced, so powerful, that your character and temperament makes more difference than anything else. What I liked about Reagan was he had an executive demeanor, he had good character and temperament, he was a good delegator, and he wasn't afraid to bring to him, as Lincoln did, his rivals. I mean, if you think about it, he picked the guy that ran against him, H.W. Bush, as his vice president, Bush's
Hmm.
campaign manager, to be Reagan's chief of staff. Then, when Reagan got in trouble over Irangate in 1987, he brought in Howard Baker, who had also tried to run against him, to be his chief of staff. And all of those men were broad gauged, experienced, knew the way of Washington, knew a lot about our country, and they helped Reagan be, I think, the person who best fit the job of the 10 I knew.
Former Senator Lamar Alexander, his new book is The Education of a Senator from JFK to Trump. I want to ask about George H.W. Bush and Barack Obama when we come back. We'll continue with Lamar Alexander in just a moment. Scott Bertram sitting in for Steve and Ivy this morning here on Daybreak.
Did you know that American home
It's Daybreak with Steve and Ivy Gruber. Scott Bertram sitting in for Steve and Ivy, heading back into the world of music history. 1983, 43 years ago today, David Bowie went to #1 on the charts with this song. Nile Rodgers playing guitar and producing Let's Dance from David Bowie, #1 on this day back in 1983. We are currently dancing with former U.S. Senator, former Tennessee Governor Lamar Alexander. His brand new book is right there, The Education of a Senator, From JFK to Trump. He continues with us now. Senator, thanks for sticking around. George H.W. Bush, as we continue talking about presidents you've worked with, you say in the book that he was running for president. You asked him, why do you want to be president? Why are you running for president? And George H.W. Bush didn't have a great answer. He said he was bad on the vision thing. He had no ideological underpinning for wanting to be president. Why is this willingness to serve not quite enough if you want to be great at public service?
Well, I think Bush was actually a very good president, but he unlike Reagan, if you'd asked Ronald Reagan the question, why are you running and what do you hope to accomplish? He would have said, I want to put a harness on the Soviet Union and a harness on Washington, D.C. He knew exactly why he wanted to run. I think H.W. Bush really felt that he was equipped to be president and that he would do whatever the right thing to do was. And for example, in international affairs, he might have been our most able president, the way he presided over the disintegration of the Soviet Union and the unification of Germany, and the way he conducted the Gulf War. I think about him as we talk about the Iran war today. I believe President Trump is probably doing what some American presidents sooner or later is going to have to do, which is to use force to keep Iran from having a nuclear weapon. But if you think back the way H.W. Bush did that, when Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait, Bush took several months. He got the world behind him. He got the world to pay for the war. He got the United States Senate to endorse it. Then he put 1 million men on the ground. He had a limited objective, and he got to Iraq, got Saddam Hussein out, and he left. Cost the United States $6 or $7 billion for that entire exercise because the rest of the world paid for it. That's the kind of leadership that I would hope that the Trump administration would do as it thinks about what do we do about this Iran war we've gotten ourselves into.
Barack Obama, President Obama, Senator Alexander, you say he's a good policy guy. Not that he has good policies, but he understands policy, but bad at human relations on the job, 8 years in the White House. Are we somewhat lucky that he was bad at human relations, that perhaps more of the Obama agenda was not implemented?
Well, he was the smartest guy in the room, and his White House was like a Harvard Law School board of editors. They kept coming up with all these complicated ideas for what to make the whole country do, like Obamacare, and that the country doesn't work easily that way. He also, although he is very smart, he seemed less comfortable in his human relations. Wasn't really interested in working with the Republicans for the first few years, but when we got control of the Congress in his last 2 years. I was able to work well with him. We fixed No Child Left Behind, set decisions back to states for schools, passed the 21st Century Cures Act, moving medical miracles into doctors' offices and patients' lives. He called both those laws Christmas miracles, and he should get credit for being a part of them.
The Cures Bill, the 21st Century Cures Bill, you say it's a bill that you worked on, legislation you worked on that helped more people than any law you ever worked on. Why was that so important to you? How has that literally affected the lives of Americans since passage?
Well, I'll give you an example. I had a fellow named Doug Oliver from Nashville that drove up to see me in my Senate office. He was blind, going blind. And the Vanderbilt doctors said, we can't do anything for you. Look on the internet. He found a stem cell technology on the internet. They took cells out of his eye, re-engineered them, put them back in, and he drove up to tell me that he could see. And because of the new medical miracles we have similar things going on with cancer. I have friends who you can take their blood out, re-engineer the cells, in their blood, put it back in, and cure lymphoma. We have all the 21st Century Cures Bill helped advance that kind of research, and it helped prepare us for the COVID vaccine, which was a remarkable accomplishment by President Trump and his administration to get the diagnostic tests, the vaccine, the cures out of that. Probably, I think, the biggest federal government successful enterprise since the Manhattan Project built the atom bomb. The president doesn't take credit for it. The researchers who figured it out won the Nobel Prize that he talks about. I wish he would take credit for it, and I wish his new health secretary would agree with him.
Senator Lamar Alexander, his book, The Education of a Senator. We got around 60 seconds left. I want to ask this. You have spent a lifetime in politics. That's what the book is about. Politics is important to me. I stay up on news. I host this show. Politics is important to many of our listeners. But are we at a point in America where politics perhaps should be less important to everyday Americans?
Well, life is much bigger than politics. But we need talented men and women in politics. There's so many things that if you want fixed, you have to be in public office to do it. So I wrote the book in order to try to inspire people to believe that if you really want to help the most people and keep our republic from falling apart, that you should try to find some time in your life to be elected to office or go to work for somebody who has.
It is harder and harder to do that for many reasons. We actually have some local offices here in our area in southern Michigan where people, it's open, it's vacant. They cannot find someone who wants to run for these local offices. So something to keep an eye on. Also something to check out is the book, The Education of a Senator, From JFK to Trump by Lamar Alexander, former U.S. Senator, former governor, and so much more. A really interesting read through the past 50, 60 years of American history through your eyes. Senator Alexander, thanks so much for joining us here on Daybreak.
Thanks for your time.
Appreciate it. More next here on Daybreak. Scott Bertram filling in for Steve and Ivy. It's Daybreak with Steve and Ivy Gruber. Steve and Ivy off today and tomorrow. I'm back with you tomorrow. Got a great show planned. And then Monday is Memorial Day. Enjoy the day. Steve and Ivy back on Tuesday of next week. My thanks to former Senator Lamar Alexander. Everyone remembers that Jeb Bush had those campaign signs that said Jeb with an exclamation point at the end. He wasn't the first. When Lamar Alexander ran for president, he had these signs that said Lamar with an exclamation point. With flannels, it was his signature flannel that he wore. And as I mentioned, he had a cameo on SNL during that 1996, I think it was 96, yeah, because Bob Dole was involved, presidential run, in which he played himself on a cold open of SNL back in 1996. Thanks to him for joining us. His book available now. A couple other birthdays today. Mentioned Al Franken turned 71. Judge Reinhold turns 69 years old today. 69 for Judge Reinhold. I always said that Judge Reinhold has just about the perfect amount of celebrity in which he's done a lot of cool stuff. Judge Reinhold, Fast Times at Ridgemont High, Beverly Hills Cop and the sequels, did a movie with Zucker Abrams Zucker in, oh, no, I can't remember the name of it now. But did that film with Zucker Abrams and Zucker. And then it was in Seinfeld, too. And yet, if you saw Judge Reinhold on the street, you probably wouldn't stop and say, oh, my goodness, it's Judge Reinhold. He'd kind of just be another guy for the most part, but also famous enough to kind of get some perks, right? He had like a proper amount of fame, I think. Judge Reinhold is 69 years old today, so happy birthday to him. This portion of the show brought to you by Patriots Relief. Steve's been sharing with you all the amazing benefits of Patriots Relief CBD. Products have not only brought tremendous relief to Ivy and Steve, but also their dog, Cody. They saw a change in their senior dog, Cody, after giving her Patriots Relief CBD. Brought significant relief, allowed her to be more active in her last 2.5 years. Brought them great comfort. To learn more about what products might be right for you, pick up the phone, call Patriots Relief at 877-203-1776 or visit patriotsrelief.com. Place your order, get 40% off and free shipping with a promo code Gruber. That's 877-230-1776 or visit patriotsrelief.com, promo code Gruber, and I'll see you tomorrow.
Watch out, folks. There's a new